I can share my bed with you, human. I was shocked by the alien woman's offer. The pod hit atmosphere like a tin can thrown against a wall. Daniel's teeth rattled as the control panel lit up with warnings in 17 different shades of red, each one screaming a unique flavor of impending doom. Hull integrity compromised, navigation offline, life support running on fumes, and what he suspected was sheer optimism. The atmospheric scanner, the entire reason he was out here charting Viridian 7 in the first place, had gone silent approximately 3 seconds before everything else decided to join the party of catastrophic failure. He managed to wrestle the pod into something resembling a controlled descent, which was generous terminology for organized plummeting. The acid rain started the moment he broke through the cloud layer, fat drops that sizzled against the cockpit window like angry chemistry experiments. Through the deluge, he caught sight of something that shouldn't exist on a planet the colonial charts swore was uninhabited. A structure, crystalline and pulsing with soft bioluminescent light, sitting in the middle of absolutely nowhere like someone had misplaced a very expensive lamp. The pod's landing gear deployed with a grinding sound that suggested several important components had recently divorced each other. Daniel hit the ground harder than dignity allowed, and the emergency hatch blew open with a hiss that released him into air that smelled like ozone and regret. The rain touched his emergency suit and immediately began expressing strong opinions about synthetic polymer bonds. He could see the fabric pitting and bubbling where the drops made contact. He ran, not gracefully. His boots squelched through mud that had the consistency of hostile pudding, and twice he nearly went down in a sprawl that would have made excellent footage for the kind of blooper reels that ended careers. The crystalline structure grew larger as he approached, its entrance a perfect arch that seemed to invite him inside while simultaneously judging his poor life choices. Daniel stumbled through the doorway and immediately froze. Not from the cold, but from the sudden certainty that he'd just intruded on something significant. The interior was vast, walls that curved upward into geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, as if they existed in more dimensions than his human brain was equipped to process. The floor beneath his feet felt warm and oddly alive, responding to his weight with gentle luminescence that rippled outward like water. And there she was. She stood near what might have been a table or possibly a very confident sculpture, her skin catching the ambient light and throwing it back in shades of deep blue that reminded him of Earth's oceans before they'd gotten complicated. Silver hair fell past her shoulders in a way that suggested it had never encountered the concept of a bad hair day. Her eyes glowed faintly, the pale gold of distant stars, and they fixed on him with an expression somewhere between curiosity and the look scientists gave interesting bacterial cultures. The ears gave her away. Long, elegantly pointed, they swept back from her skull in graceful curves that were the only visible deviation from human anatomy. Otherwise, she could have walked through any Earth city without raising eyebrows, assuming she wore a hat and didn't mind people asking about her skincare routine. Daniel opened his mouth to apologize, to explain, to say literally anything that might justify his dripping, half-dissolved presence in her obviously private sanctuary. What came out was, "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to. The rain, my pod." He gestured vaguely behind him at the storm and his ruined spacecraft, and possibly the entire concept of human space exploration. "I should go." He actually turned toward the door, toward the acid rain that was definitely still expressing opinions about organic molecules, before her voice stopped him. "I can share my bed with you, human." His heart performed a gymnastic routine that would have scored well in competitive cardiac events. He turned back slowly, certain he'd misheard, that the universal translator in his dying suit had finally given up and started making suggestions instead of translations. She gestured to a platform draped in fabrics that seemed to shift colors when he wasn't looking directly at them, shimmering like captured starlight or very pretentious bedsheets. Her expression remained perfectly neutral, as if she'd offered him tea rather than sleeping arrangements. "The night is cold," she continued, her voice carrying harmonics that made him think of wind chimes in a storm. "You will die out there." It was practical, logical, The kind of straightforward problem-solving that made perfect sense if he ignored the way she was looking at him. Studying him like he was a puzzle she intended to solve through empirical observation. There was curiosity in those glowing eyes, yes, but something else lurked beneath the surface. Something that made him feel simultaneously like prey and like he'd just been invited to the most interesting party in the galaxy. Thunder cracked outside, loud enough to rattle the crystalline walls. Daniel looked at the doorway, at the rain that would dissolve him given enough time and motivation. Then back at her, at the bed, at the choice that wasn't really a choice at all. She tilted her head, waiting. Patient. A small smile played at the corner of her mouth. He took a step forward. Daniel woke to the smell of something that his brain interpreted as cinnamon having an argument with electricity. His body felt like it had been disassembled and put back together by someone working from dubious instructions, but he was warm and decidedly not dissolved by acid rain, which he considered a significant improvement over his prospects 12 hours ago. The platform beneath him had apparently spent the night gently massaging his muscle groups because he felt better than he had any right to after crash landing on a hostile planet. The shimmering fabrics had regulated his temperature with the precision of very expensive hotel bedding, and he'd slept more soundly than he had in months aboard his survey vessel, where the life support system hummed at a frequency specifically designed to prevent deep REM cycles. Lysa stood near a curved console that grew from the wall like crystalline fungus, her fingers dancing through holographic interfaces that responded to her touch with musical chimes. She glanced over as he sat up, and her smile suggested she found his general state of dishevelment entertaining. "You snore," she said. "It sounds like your species is trying to communicate with whales." "Good morning to you, too," Daniel managed, running a hand through hair that had apparently decided to stage a rebellion during the night. "And humans don't communicate with whales anymore. We tried that in the 21st century. The whales weren't interested in our opinions." She laughed, the sound like bells in an avalanche, and gestured to a floating sphere of liquid that hovered near the console. "Morning fuel. Your body chemistry suggests you require stimulants to achieve basic cognitive function after sleep cycles." He approached cautiously, eyeing the sphere that seemed to defy several laws of physics he'd been assured were non-negotiable. The liquid inside swirled with colors that didn't exist in standard spectrum analysis. "Is this coffee?" "Coffee is the burnt extract of seeds, yes? This is better." She made a gesture and the sphere drifted toward him. "Drink." Daniel cupped his hands beneath it, and the sphere obligingly released its contents into his palms before dissipating. The liquid was warm and smelled like starlight might smell if starlight had opinions about aromatics. He sipped carefully. His teeth immediately felt transparent, not invisible, not gone, just suddenly and profoundly aware of themselves in a way teeth should never be. The taste moved through flavor profiles like it was running from the law. Sweet, then savory, then something he suspected was the color blue, then back to sweet again with a detour through what might have been nostalgia. "What?" he started, but his words came out as small silver bubbles that floated upward and popped with tiny chiming sounds. Lisa's shoulders shook with suppressed laughter. "Side effect, temporary. Your vocal cords are experiencing quantum uncertainty. Give it a moment." Daniel glared at her while producing more musical bubbles, which somewhat undermined the intended effect. His teeth gradually stopped feeling like they were auditioning for a career in modern dance, and after 30 seconds his voice returned, slightly higher pitched than normal. "You could have warned me," he said, relieved to hear actual words instead of musical spheres. "Where is the entertainment in that?" She pulled something from the console, a silver packet that looked suspiciously like the emergency rations from his pod. "I found these in your vessel's cargo hold. You were planning to sustain yourself on sad silver packets of astronaut paste? Those are nutritionally complete meal replacements, engineered for optimal—" He stopped as she tore one open and sniffed the contents, her face contorting into an expression of profound betrayal. "This smells like failure, and bureaucracy had children together," she said. "No wonder you people are so small and sad-looking." "I'm average height for a human male," Daniel protested. "Exactly." She tossed the packet aside where it landed with a depressing squelch. "I will feed you real food, but first, You should attempt to contact your people, yes? Let them know you haven't been dissolved into component molecules. The reminder hit him like cold water. His job, the survey mission, the very expensive equipment he'd just scattered across Viridian 7's surface, like the world's worst yard sale. He patted his suit, found his communicator, and activated it. Static. Beautiful, career-ending static. The rain, Lisa said helpfully, watching him cycle through frequencies with increasing desperation. Your communication array is likely experiencing what you might call aggressive molecular reorganization. It's dead. The communicator is dead. Daniel felt panic rising in his chest like badly behaved carbonation. My supervisor is going to kill me. No, first she's going to file paperwork about killing me. Then she's going to kill me in triplicate. Then she's going to revoke my flight certification and make me process asteroid mining claims for the rest of my natural life. Lisa tilted her head, those pointed ears catching the light. Your species has very elaborate punishment rituals. You don't understand. I was supposed to do a simple atmospheric scan. 12 hours in and out, file a report. Instead, I crashed on a supposedly uninhabited planet, and I'm stranded with... He stopped, realizing how that sounded. With a strange alien woman who offered you her bed? Lisa finished, her eyes gleaming with amusement. Yes, I can see how this complicates your bureaucratic narrative. Can you help? With the pod, I mean? He gestured vaguely toward the entrance. Do you have tools, technology, anything that might let me repair the communication system? She studied him for a long moment, then smiled in a way that made him deeply uncertain about what he'd just agreed to. I can help, but first, she turned back to the console. Breakfast. You cannot repair anything while your cells are fueled by failure paste. Sit. A chair grew from the floor behind him, which seemed excessive, but Daniel was too tired to argue with responsive architecture. The breakfast Lisa prepared made Daniel question everything he thought he understood about food. It arrived on plates that weren't quite solid, shimmering at the edges, like they existed in a state of polite uncertainty. The meal itself looked like scrambled eggs, if eggs had decided to pursue a career in abstract expressionism, accompanied by something that resembled bread, but hummed quietly when he touched it. Why is it humming? He asked, poking the bread with scientific caution. Residual quantum vibration from the synthesizer, Lisa said, eating her own portion with elegant efficiency. It settles after a few moments. Unless you keep poking it, then it gets excited. Daniel stopped poking. The bread's humming decreased to a satisfied purr. After a meal that tasted significantly better than it had any right to, they ventured outside. The acid rain had stopped, leaving behind a landscape that steamed gently in the morning light. Daniel's pod sat approximately 50 meters from the sanctuary, looking like it had lost a fight with a recycling center. Panels hung at depressing angles, the hull pitted and scarred, one landing strut bent at an angle that suggested it was reconsidering its life choices. Lisa circled the wreckage with professional interest, occasionally making small humming sounds that eerily matched the bread's earlier frequency. She pulled a device from her pocket. At least Daniel assumed it was her pocket. Her clothing seemed to have storage capacity that violated conventional geometry, and waved it over the pod's remains. Your power core is intact, she announced, which is impressive given that everything around it has experienced what I would describe as aggressive unscheduling. Unscheduling? Daniel peered at his ruined navigation array, trying not to calculate how many months of salary it represented. Things were scheduled to be attached. They are no longer, thus unscheduled. She tapped the device and holographic schematics bloomed in the air between them, showing the pod's internal systems in loving detail. Your communication array, however, is very dead. The acid consumed 17 critical components and turned 3 others into decorative sculptures. Daniel felt his career prospects dying alongside the communication array. How long would it take to repair? Lisa made a gesture and the hologram rotated, highlighting sections in colors that range from encouraging green to deeply pessimistic purple. With your human tools and knowledge? Approximately never. The quantum harmonics alone require... She paused, searching for words. Imagine trying to play a symphony using only a rock and strong opinions. That bad? Worse, the rock would produce better results. She dismissed the hologram with a flick of her fingers. However, I have tools that do not rely on rocks or opinions. Come. She led him back to the sanctuary, down a corridor he hadn't noticed the previous night. The walls pulsed with bioluminescence that responded to their footsteps, creating patterns that looked suspiciously like they were laughing at him. They descended 3 levels, or possibly ascended. The gravity felt uncertain about its orientation, and emerged into a workshop that made Daniel's engineering training feel like finger painting. Tools floated in organized chaos, each one humming at different frequencies. Workbenches grew from the floor at heights that adjusted as Lysa approached. A crystalline matrix dominated the center of the room, crackling with energy that made his hair stand on end, in ways that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with unstable electromagnetic fields. "This is where I maintain the sanctuary systems," Lisa said, pulling tools from the air like she was picking fruit. "The technology is several generations beyond what your species currently employs. Your pod systems are," she paused diplomatically, "charmingly primitive." "We prefer reliably functional," Daniel said, watching her assemble components with movements too fast to follow. "Usually, when they're not being dissolved by surprise acid rain." "Your charts mark this planet as uninhabited," Lisa said, not looking up from her work. "Did you not find it suspicious that detailed atmospheric data was missing?" The mission brief said it was a low-priority scan. In and out, file a report, collect a paycheck. Daniel leaned against a workbench that immediately adjusted its height to provide optimal leaning support. "Nobody mentioned the rain was corrosive or that there'd be ancient alien sanctuaries or beautiful women offering to—" He stopped, realizing what he'd said. Lisa glanced up, one elegant eyebrow raised, her pointed ears tilted slightly forward in what he was learning meant amusement. "Beautiful? I meant, the sanctuary is beautiful. Architecturally, very impressive use of crystalline matrices and bioluminescent." He was making it worse. He could feel himself making it worse with each word. "I have been alone here for 73 of your years," Lisa said, returning to her work but smiling now. "Waiting for travelers that never came. The sanctuary was built as a way station, back when my people moved between stars like you move between rooms. Then the radiation pulses began and everyone left." She connected 2 components with a satisfying click. "I volunteered to stay, to maintain the systems, to wait. 73 years. Daniel did the math, gave up, tried again. "How old are you?" "By your counting? Old enough that your lifespan looks like a sneeze in comparison." She held up a device that looked like a tuning fork had merged with a kaleidoscope. "This will interface with your pod's power core and reconstruct the communication array's quantum signature. In theory." "In theory? The alternative is you attempt repairs with your rock and opinions," Lisa said cheerfully. "I give that approach a success rate of nearly 0%, with a margin of error of 0%. Daniel watched her work, marveling at how she manipulated technology like it was an extension of her thoughts. She'd been alone for 73 years, maintaining a sanctuary for travelers who never arrived. And now here he was, one crashed human who couldn't even keep his atmospheric scanner functional. "Why did you really stay?" he asked quietly. Her hands stilled. Those golden eyes found his, and for a moment the amused mask dropped. "Because I was tired," she said, "of moving, of never staying, of my people's endless migration with no destination." She resumed working, but slower now. "I wanted to find meaning in stillness, to see what happens when you stop running." Daniel thought about his own running. From Earth, from relationships that required staying in one place, from family dinners where everyone asked when he'd settle down, as if drifting through space wasn't a perfectly valid life choice. "And," he asked, "did you find it? The meaning?" Lisa smiled, connecting the final component. "Ask me again in another 73 years. They were halfway through installing the reconstructed communication array when the star decided to have opinions. The sanctuary's walls flashed warning patterns in colors Daniel's brain struggled to categorize, and Lisa's head snapped up with the alertness of someone who'd just heard their house catch fire. "Radiation pulse," she said, "already moving. Inside, now." Daniel grabbed the toolkit, or tried to, The tools grabbed themselves and fled toward the sanctuary like trained pets and ran. Lisa was faster, her movements efficient in a way that suggested extensive practice with emergency evacuations. They cleared the entrance just as the sky turned a shade of violet that made his eyes water. The pod wasn't as fortunate. Through the sanctuary's entrance, he watched the hull begin to glow, metal sublimating directly into vapor where the radiation touched it. The landing strut that had been bent now simply ceased to exist, along with a significant portion of the cargo bay and what remained of his personal effects. "Well," Daniel said, watching his spare uniform become atomic gossip, "I guess I'm not getting my deposit back on that pod." Lisa sealed the entrance with a gesture, and the crystalline walls hummed as the shields engaged. The radiation washed over the sanctuary like angry ocean waves, visible as sheets of purple-tinged energy that made the air outside shimmer and distort. Inside, the temperature remained perfectly comfortable, the light soft and steady. "How long does this last?" Daniel asked, trying not to think about what those radiation levels would do to unshielded human tissue. "Anywhere from minutes to days," Lisa said, pulling up holographic displays that showed the star's current tantrum in real time. Graphs spiked and writhed like angry snakes. "Your species hasn't mapped this star's behavior patterns. If they had, Viridian 7 would be marked as highly inadvisable for casual visits." "The chart said uninhabited and low priority," Daniel protested weakly. "The charts lied. Or more likely, nobody bothered to update them after the initial survey." She manipulated the displays, tracking their radiation's intensity. "You won't be leaving today, or tomorrow. Even if we finish the communication repairs, your pod's hull won't survive another direct exposure." The reality of his situation crystallized with uncomfortable clarity. He was stranded. Properly, genuinely stranded, on a planet that was actively hostile to human-designed spacecraft, with no way to leave until rescue arrived. His supervisor would be filing paperwork. So much paperwork, possibly creating new paperwork categories specifically for his situation. "I can call for rescue," Lisa said, watching his expression cycle through several varieties of panic. "The sanctuary's communication systems have significantly better range than your pods, but the nearest human outpost is 4 days away at standard cruising speed." "4 days," Daniel repeated. "I'll be staying here for 4 days. Unless you prefer to dissolve in acid rain or sublimate in radiation." Lisa's smile was entirely too amused. "The bed is large enough for extended visits." Heat crept up Daniel's neck. Sleeping one night in shared quarters during an emergency was one thing. 4 days was starting to feel like a different category of arrangement entirely, one that his brain kept trying to interpret in ways that weren't helpful. I could sleep on the floor," he offered. "Or maybe there's another room." "The sanctuary has 17 rooms," Lisa said, "but the sleeping platform in my quarters has the best temperature regulation and the most comfortable quantum field alignment. Unless you enjoy waking up with your molecules vibrating at discordant frequencies." "That's a thing that can happen?" "Only in the eastern wing. I haven't recalibrated those systems in 40 years. She dismissed the radiation displays and moved toward another section of the sanctuary. "Come. If you're staying for days, you should eat something that isn't emergency rations or quantum-excited bread." The food synthesizer was a work of art disguised as kitchen equipment, all flowing curves and surfaces that responded to touch with musical feedback. Lisa's fingers danced across controls that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the visible 3, calling up menus in languages that predated human writing by millions of years. "What do humans eat?" she asked. "Besides failure paste and processed regret?" "We have a pretty diverse cuisine, actually," Daniel said, trying to remember what real food tasted like after 6 months of ship rations. "There's this thing called pizza." "Describe it." "Okay, so you take flat bread, cover it with tomato sauce, add cheese, and then—" Lisa's expression progressed through confusion to mild horror. "You cover bread with coagulated bovine lactation? When you say it like that, it sounds weird." "It is weird," she insisted. "Your species takes the mammary secretions of another species, allows bacteria to process it, then applies heat until it becomes stretchy, and applies this to bread?" "Millions of humans can't be wrong," Daniel said, though her description was making him reconsider several life choices. Millions of humans also thought asbestos was an excellent building material, Lisa countered. She studied the synthesizer's options with the focus of someone attempting to decode an ancient curse. I will make something that won't offend your digestive system's limited capabilities. Sit. Another chair grew from the floor, this one with the audacity to massage his lower back without being asked. Daniel sat and watched Lisa work, her silver hair catching the ambient light as she coaxed the synthesizer into producing something edible for human biochemistry. The radiation storm continued outside, turning the sky colors that probably had names in scientific journals but looked mainly like cosmic rage. Inside the sanctuary, warmth and safety held firm against the hostile universe beyond the shields. Daniel realized with a mixture of anxiety and something dangerously close to contentment that 4 days stranded here might not be the worst thing that had ever happened to him. The meal Lisa synthesized turned out to be something between a casserole and a philosophical statement about the nature of protein. It tasted like chicken if chicken had attended university and gotten complicated about its identity. Daniel ate it anyway, hunger overriding his tongue's existential confusion, while Lisa watched with the satisfied expression of someone who'd successfully fed a stray animal. Your approval is noted, she said when he scraped the plate clean. Tomorrow I will attempt this pizza abomination you described, though I make no promises about the coagulated lactation. It's called cheese, Daniel said, and it's a cornerstone of human cuisine. So was lead piping once. She collected the plates, which dissolved in her hands and flowed back into the synthesizer, like liquid mercury. Your species has very optimistic relationships with questionable substances. The radiation storm showed no signs of stopping. If anything, the displays indicated it was getting more enthusiastic, the star throwing energy into space like a child having a tantrum with nuclear weapons. Daniel found himself pacing the sanctuary's main chamber, unable to settle despite the comfortable furniture that kept trying to anticipate his needs. You're agitated, Lisa observed from where she sat cross-legged on a floating cushion that shouldn't exist but did anyway. Your body language suggests stress about extended cohabitation. I'm not stressed, Daniel lied. This is a lot. Being stranded, waiting for rescue, imposing on your hospitality. You think you're imposing? Lisa tilted her head, those pointed ears catching the light in ways that made concentration difficult. I have been alone for 73 years. You are the first person to enter this sanctuary since my people left. If anything, you're performing a valuable service by making sounds that aren't my own voice echoing back at me. Still, 4 days is a long time to share space with a stranger. Then we should become less strange to each other. She gestured to the cushion beside hers, which materialized with eager helpfulness. Sit. Tell me about your running. Daniel sat carefully on the cushion, which immediately began supporting his weight with what felt like tiny anti-gravity fields. My what? You said you were running from Earth, from relationships, from family expectations? Her golden eyes studied him with uncomfortable perception. I recognize the pattern. I've been running too, just in the opposite direction. You run toward empty space. I ran toward staying still. The honesty in her voice made deflection feel dishonest. Daniel found himself talking, words spilling out easier than they should to someone he'd known for less than 2 days. He told her about Earth, overcrowded and overwhelming, cities stacked vertically because horizontal space had run out decades ago. About family dinners where everyone had opinions about his choices, where his mother asked when he'd find a nice person and settle down, as if the concept of home was universal rather than personally negotiable. They wanted me to take a position at the Mars terraforming project, he said. Steady work, good benefits, a place in the colonial housing lottery. I took a survey contract instead. 6-month tours, different systems every rotation, no permanent address. And this makes you happy? Lisa asked. Daniel considered the question honestly. It makes me not unhappy, which I've learned is close enough for government work. She laughed, that bell-like sound that seemed to resonate in his chest. I understand this. My people couldn't comprehend why I wanted to stop moving. They migrate constantly, following resource waves and stellar cycles, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home. When I volunteered to remain here, they thought I was ill. Mentally compromised. Were you? Probably, she admitted cheerfully. But I was also tired. Tired of packing, of goodbyes that weren't really goodbyes because you'd see the same people at the next way station. Tired of meaningful relationships being impossible because everyone was always in transit. She pulled her knees to her chest, suddenly looking younger despite her incomprehensible age. I wanted to see what happens when you stay, when you let time pass in one place instead of outrunning it. And what happens? You get very good at talking to yourself. You develop strong opinions about optimal shield harmonics. You wait. She looked at him, vulnerability flickering behind the amusement. And occasionally the universe sends you a crashed human who snores like aquatic mammals and questions your food choices. I do not snore like whales, Daniel protested, though he suspected he absolutely did. Your denial is noted and dismissed. She stood, the cushion dissolving beneath her. It's late. The radiation will continue through the night. We should sleep. The sleeping platform waited in her quarters, that same shimmering expanse of fabrics that had cradled Daniel the previous night. Somehow it felt different now, less like emergency shelter and more like intentional intimacy. They settled on opposite sides, a careful distance between them that felt both respectful and slightly ridiculous given the platform's size. Lysa, Daniel said into the darkness. The bioluminescent ceiling dimmed to simulate night. Yes? Thank you. For the shelter, the food, the company, for not letting me dissolve in acid rain. The rain would have been wasteful, she said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. You're much more interesting intact. Silence settled over them, comfortable and warm. Outside, radiation continued rearranging molecules with extreme prejudice. Inside, two beings who'd chosen loneliness for different reasons shared space and discovered it felt less like imposition and more like possibility. Daniel fell asleep to the sound of Lysa's breathing, steady and real, and didn't dream of running at all. The rescue ship arrived on the fourth day exactly as Lysa had predicted, appearing in Viridian 7's orbit like a bureaucratic miracle wrapped in reinforced hull plating. Daniel received the transmission on the Sanctuary's communication array, his supervisor's voice crackling through with a mixture of relief and the promise of extensive paperwork. Daniel, you absolute disaster magnet, she said, somehow conveying both affection and the threat of administrative consequences. We've been tracking your beacon since you went dark. What happened? Daniel glanced at Lysa, who was pretending not to eavesdrop while obviously eavesdropping. Atmospheric anomalies, he said carefully. The acid rain compromised my pod's integrity. I found shelter and waited for extraction. Shelter? On an uninhabited planet? His supervisor's skepticism traveled perfectly across the communication channel. Daniel, if you crashed into something classified, now's the time to tell me before the debrief. Not classified, Daniel said. Just not in the charts. There's a way station here, ancient but functional, maintained by... He looked at Lysa again, uncertain how to explain her existence without triggering 17 different first contact protocols. Lysa moved to the communication console, her fingers dancing through the holographic interface. This is Lysa, current keeper of Sanctuary 7, she said, her voice taking on a formal quality Daniel hadn't heard before. I can provide detailed atmospheric and stellar radiation data for this system, which your charts are missing. The information should prove valuable for colonial navigation updates. There was a pause on the other end, the kind of silence that suggested multiple people were frantically checking regulations and precedent. Finally, understood. We'll be in range for shuttle deployment in 6 hours. Daniel, prepare for extraction. And please tell me your pod isn't a complete loss. Daniel looked out at what remained of his survey vessel, which now resembled abstract sculpture more than functional spacecraft. Define complete. That's what I thought. The accountants are going to love this. His supervisor sighed with the weariness of someone calculating replacement costs. 6 hours, Daniel. Don't get dissolved by anything in the meantime. The transmission ended, leaving Daniel and Lysa in silence that felt heavier than it should. 6 hours. Then rescue, debriefing, return to his regular rotation of empty space and solitary surveys. Back to running, except now he'd experienced what it felt like to stop, even temporarily. You should eat before you go, Lysa said, already moving toward the food synthesizer. The journey back will be long and filled with humans asking you questions about things that aren't their business. That's an accurate summary of debriefings, yes. Daniel followed her, watching as she called up menus with practiced efficiency. Will you be okay? Here, I mean. Alone again. I've been alone for 73 years, she said, not looking at him. 4 days with a crashed human hasn't fundamentally altered my relationship with solitude. But her voice carried something that suggested otherwise, a tightness that made Daniel's chest ache in ways that had nothing to do with atmospheric pressure. She made breakfast, actual breakfast this time, eggs that didn't philosophize and bread that remained acoustically neutral. They ate in companionable silence, the kind of quiet that comes from knowing words would complicate things better left simple. Afterward, Daniel helped Lisa compile the stellar data for his supervisor, watching her organize 73 years of observations into formats human systems could process. The radiation patterns she documented were incredibly detailed, showing cycles and variations that would take human researchers decades to map. The data was valuable, potentially mission-critical for future colonial expansion in this sector. This is remarkable work, Daniel said, scrolling through measurements that track stellar behavior with precision his equipment couldn't approach. You could publish this, recognition, academic positions, your choice of research facilities. I don't want recognition, Lisa interrupted. I want... She stopped, those pointed ears tilting back slightly. I wanted to see what happens when you stay in one place. Now I know. Time passes, stars pulse. Occasionally someone crashes nearby and disrupts your routine. Sorry about the disruption. Don't be. She finally looked at him, golden eyes reflecting the sanctuary's soft light. It was the most interesting 4 days I've had in 7 decades. The rescue shuttle arrived precisely on schedule, landing near the sanctuary with the efficiency of military operations. 2 crew members emerged in full environmental suits, clearly briefed on the acid rain situation. They greeted Daniel with professional relief and eyed the sanctuary with barely concealed scientific curiosity. The debrief team is going to have questions, one of them said, handing Daniel a replacement suit. About the way station, the atmospheric data, the whole situation. I have answers, Daniel said, suiting up while trying not to think about how this was ending. Most of them are probably in the data files Lisa provided. Is that her? The other crew member asked, nodding toward where Lisa stood in the sanctuary entrance. The keeper? That's her. She looks almost human, except the ears. Yeah, Daniel said quietly, except the ears. The crew gave him privacy for goodbyes, retreating to the shuttle with diplomatic efficiency. Daniel approached Lisa, suddenly uncertain about protocols for parting from alien women who'd shared their beds and their loneliness. Thank you, he said, because everything else felt inadequate. For everything, the shelter, the food, the company. For not letting me die stupidly on a planet the charts said was uninhabited. The charts lie frequently, Lisa said. You should remember that for future surveys. I will. Daniel hesitated, then pulled out his datapad and keyed in a sequence. I'm filing a request to return here as a researcher, to study the stellar anomalies more extensively. It'll take time to process, maybe 6 months for approval and assignment, but you're thinking about stopping, Lisa finished. At least temporarily. Maybe. He met her eyes. If the keeper of Sanctuary 7 wouldn't mind occasional company, someone to argue with about food choices and make sounds that aren't echoes? Her smile could have powered starships. I can share my bed with you, human, she said, echoing that first night. When you return, I'll hold you to that. The shuttle lifted off 20 minutes later, carrying Daniel away from Viridian 7 and toward the tedious reality of debriefings and replacement equipment requisitions. Through the viewport, he watched the sanctuary grow smaller, Lisa's figure a silver point in the entrance until distance made her vanish. 6 months later, Daniel's research request was approved with surprising speed, likely helped by the valuable stellar data. His ship touched down in familiar acid rain, and Lisa met him at the sanctuary entrance, wearing the same amused expression, as if no time had passed at all. You came back, she said. I stopped running, Daniel replied. Thought I'd try running toward something instead. She stepped aside, letting him enter the sanctuary that somehow felt more like home than anywhere he'd lived on Earth. The sleeping platform waited, shimmering and patient. Outside, the star pulsed with radiation. Inside, two people who'd chosen loneliness discovered something better in the space between staying and running. In the simple act of sharing time with someone who understood what it meant to stop. Daniel unpacked equipment he didn't really need, tools for research he'd conduct eventually, and Lisa laughed as he explained why he'd brought 17 different atmospheric sensors when her systems were demonstrably superior. They had time now, time to talk, to share silence, to figure out what happened when running stopped and staying began. The sanctuary hummed around them, alive and welcoming, no longer waiting for travelers who never came. The sanctuary's bioluminescent ceiling dimmed to simulate another night, casting soft shadows across two figures who had finally stopped running. One toward emptiness, one toward stillness, and found each other in the space between. Daniel watched Lisa's silver hair catch the fading light. Her pointed ears relaxed in contentment, and realized that home had never been about coordinates or addresses. It had always been about finding someone who understood why you needed to leave, and choosing to stay anyway. Outside, the star pulsed its ancient rhythm, indifferent to the small choices made in its shadow. Inside, two heartbeats synchronized in the quiet dark, proof that sometimes the most profound discoveries happen not in the vast emptiness between stars, but in the courage to stop searching and simply be found. The end. What are you running from? What does it take for you to stop and stay put? Sometimes, like Daniel, we drift through life, moving from place to place, from one relationship to another, believing that meaning is always beyond the next horizon, somewhere else. Sometimes, like Lisa, we isolate ourselves, waiting in our carefully constructed sanctuaries for purpose to knock on our door. But perhaps the answer isn't in running away or waiting. It lies in recognizing that the universe sends us exactly what we need, even if it comes dissolved in